we've been using this mostly as a YouTube channel, and as we get more experimental, there's other means to get content out. This is a good use of audio only, and there will be some visuals on YouTube as well, just to talk about something that is more recent. And rather than spend 2, 3 weeks editing, just get it out while it's fresh in everyone's mind, and just really be able to talk about it while it's topical before everyone moves on. What's cool about this channel is we don't have any real set of rules. Tim's done lots of great stuff with the cult classic movie nights, the interviews he's done, and also FairyCon, which is really cool. He's released a lot of them on his section of the channel, and I think it's awesome. I've participated in some, and it's fun. What came out the other day or recently is the new album from Hiatus Kaiyote called Mood Valiant. I've been a fan of this band since 2018. I first heard of them watching Xenia Rubinos do her What's in My Bag on the Amoeba Music channel. I was just drawn to this band. Very weird, unique, but also very musical. Great songwriters, great just overall use of soul and weird rhythms and time changes. And they really appealed to me because they were wild and explosive, but also tremendous songwriters. So, and at that point, 2018, they had released 2 albums. They'd collaborated with Q-Tip from Tribe Called Quest, and they were sampled by Drake, the Carters in the interim. I just kind of really enjoyed this band, and in a lot of ways, to me, they're kind of the next in line of what the Mahavishnu Orchestra were doing in the 1970s, and also what the Red Hot Chili Peppers were doing in that sweet spot of 1989 to 1992, that the original run with John Frusciante and Chad Smith, where just they were the most explosive band in the world. This band's quickly become my favorite young band, and there was a lot of stuff that went on in releasing this album. They were working on it since 2018. The lead singer, Napalm, was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she had surgery. She got better. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and the album was delayed even further. And then the band was shopping around for a record label, where eventually they went to Brain Feeder. So there's a lot going on, and I've really been anticipating this release. I've listened to Talk Tomahawk and Choose Your Weapon, and also solo albums that they've all put out. Pretty much, they've been in my rotation for the last 3.5 years, and just been playing them all out, trying to get all my friends into them. I was really just excited for this album. They've played some new tracks live when I saw them in 2019, and they delivered. And so, just overall, I was excited about this. And I figure rather than pass this on to Tim and have him listen to it, digest it for a bit, by the time we got this all done and edited a proper video, we'd be looking at least not the short-term future. So let's talk about the album a little bit, my overall thoughts, and just in general, what I think about some things in the music industry now as well. So we're going to start with the album's called Mood Valiant. It was released on June 25th, 2021, for those keeping score at home. And it's 12 tracks, runs 43 minutes. The first 2 tracks, interesting choice they made, Flight of the Tiger Lily and Sip Into Something Soft. So these are interludes, or I don't even want to call them skits, but these are musical interludes. And what's very interesting to me is interludes can work on an album, but the album has to be longer in length for them to work. If they take up a big chunk of the album, it becomes almost like an EP as opposed to an LP. And the problem here is you have 12 tracks, and there are 3 interludes on this album. So for all you math nerds out there, that's 25% of the tracks are dedicated to interludes. So that's going to shorten the opportunities you have to make an impression on a listener. So I don't know quite how I felt about that. There are some cases where I've loved interludes. I could go back to De La Soul's 3 Feet High and Rising. You're already 3 tracks into the album with 2 interludes. That's kind of a head scratcher there. So Chivalry is Not Dead, that's the first proper track. I heard it live 2019, and it was, as they call, a banger or pure fire. That funk bass, it was a very interesting rhythm and just overall arrangement to the track. And I think that's all stays consistent here with the recorded version. But the problem here is that the recording of it, or the rhythm section, is actually very abrasive and almost kind of takes away from it. It's too busy. I'm one who loves experimentation in music, and I love trying interesting rhythms and just not always sticking to the same 3 or 4 chords. You can have a chord progression or a melody and kind of dance around it and make little subtle changes. What happened here is just like the rhythm section, it's a little too abrasive, and the drums, especially in the bass, and the actual recording and the tone of it are a little too muddy. And it just kind of takes away from the song and makes it almost distracting and a little dissonant to listen to. So, and the slap bass as well. While it sounds good and it sounds like vintage Prince, it wasn't. Something about the tone was a little bit off to me. So it's kind of upsetting. And this is a great track live, and the recorded version I think was decent, not great. So in a lot of ways, this is almost like "I Want You to Want Me" by Cheap Trick. Everybody knows that track, but what is the version they know? It's the live at the Budokan version. Track 4, and we go gentle. So this track has a great laid back groove, and this is almost like a massive attacky, and the vocals sound are very impressive on here overall. The issue with this track is that while it's a wonderful groove, there's nothing else to it. It's one groove that they kind of vamp on and build on, and that's cool, but it almost makes it sound like background music, something you'd hear in a Barnes and Noble or a fancy restaurant. I picture this as like a ambient music you'd hear in just the ambience of town New York, a very trendy restaurant to go to. And what's interesting here is like this band I know is better songwriters. On If you listen to Choose Your Weapon, there's songs in multiple parts, arrangements, time changes, mood changes, pace changes, uh, dynamic changes, and to keep such a simple groove is it's an interesting choice. I get they're going for a very minimalistic, but I think here that this song almost feels a little undercooked to me. Or, but another analogy is when you eat a good hamburger, you also want something else with it. You just don't want a hamburger. You want fries, or you want a salad for those who are trying to eat healthier, or baked potato, or just something else on the side. To me, this just feels like a hamburger. It's good, it's solid, it's a great groove, but it doesn't go anywhere beside that. And that's what keeps it for me from being an A-level track. Get Sun, which features the Brazilian composer Arthur Barachi. This is an A+ track. It's extremely bright, it's positive, it's funky, it has a tremendous groove, and the strings which Barachi placed in here really augment the entire performance. Also, we talk about arrangement. While And We Go Gentle was very minimalistic in arrangement, this is a full arrangement with a verse, chorus, bridge, other elements, counter melodies to it. This is a perfect A+ track. It's not only a summer song, but I think this is going to be an all-time great and just big hit for this band. And you'll often hear it on Spotify or just all over the place, really. Moving right along to All the Words We Don't Say. That's the most interesting and weird track on this album. That's Hiatus Kaiyote at their best. This could have been right on Choose Your Weapon or Talk Tomahawk or anything else that the members could have done in their solo career. The song is weird. It has interesting chord progressions. Just the guitars sound somewhat dissonant, almost a little on purposely out of tune and distorted in a very Robert Fripp kind of way. And there's a lot of dynamic changes. And this is where Perrin Moss, the drummer, really goes to work the most on this album, where just the hits he does here and the cymbals and just the start stops he's doing. And the vocals are cool. It's almost a little robotic on purpose, but this is a great performance. And it has an ending that changes as well, which is something the album did not do a lot of. Hush Rattle is the third interlude. Honestly, there's no point to it. It just sounds like somebody having a clarinet or flute recital. It just doesn't really, it's just a transition piece. And it's just honestly like a waste of time, in my opinion. And I love this band. And it's tough for me to say something like that, but I would have preferred some kind of jam or something else. Rosewater is a very cool track. The piano sounds very vintage. The way it's recorded, it has kind of a haunting feel to it, like an old record, and It's they're in a 5/4 to 4/4 rhythm. So rhythmically, it's very interesting. It's like an odd time signature, almost bossa nova. The band does some really cool musical stuff on here and a great vocal performance by Napalm. At this point, I think the MVP of this record out of the four of them is Simon Maven, the keyboardist, pianist. He often doesn't, probably the most low key out of the four of them. Red Room, this is already a single that's been released, and it's a really cool track. I love the groove, very much like Erica Badu or something you would hear Macy Gray. This is another minimalist arrangement where, look, the four of these musicians are very talented, and we've heard them have very complex arrangements. Complex does not always mean better, but this song was too minimalistic for me. It had a great groove, great vocal performance, great melody, chord progression, but it didn't really, it felt like it was missing something, whether it's a solo or whether it's a bridge or just another section or even a climax, just something else was missing here that could have made that the song's going to do well and has done well already, but to be an all-time great, I think they could have done a little bit more of the arrangement. Sparkle Tape Breakup. This is an interesting one. It has a great melody and groove to it, but much like the other tracks, such as Enrico Gentle and also Red Room, it sticks to the main melody and just kind of vamps on that, and the band will build around that. It doesn't really go anywhere else beside the main melody. Even Perry Moss as a drummer here, an overall problem or thing on this album is he doesn't often explode very much, do very much explosive stuff. That may be by design, but it feels like he's only operating at about 30% efficiency. So he's keeping a very basic beat here with various variations, if that's even a word. And it's undercooked. It needed a little something more. It's funny, and I'll bring in Red Hot Chili Peppers into this again. A song like Warm Tape that they had from By the Way in 2002, very keyboard driven, very unusual for them. But even that track had a little guitar solo or a tempo change for the bridge, the different chorus, other melodies. And the Hiatus Kaiyote is capable of making complex song arrangements. So I think here, it's undercooked. Moving along to Stone or Lavender, that is pretty much the MVP of this. It is a piano ballad that Mr. Simon Maven gets to shine on again. Napalm's vocals are tremendous here. She's awesome throughout the entire album, even on the more minimalistic tracks, just rely on one groove. But this is a full-length ballad. It builds up. It has a climax. It has different parts to it. It's very cinematic. It's a story within a story, and to me, it's probably the either best or second best song on the album. The thing is, I feel this track would have fit better in the middle of the album. It's kind of like almost an interlude or to end the first half and then move on to the second half. Whereas this is the next to last track on the album, which is it's a fine place for it, but for something that's such a home run, usually bands want to put that at the front of the album. And then the final track is Blood and Marrow. So this is almost like a bossa nova in a way as well. It's a little demented, a little off with the chord progression. This is another minimalistic track where it just relies on one groove essentially. The bass is doing Paul Bender. He's almost doing something like Peanut from 311 would do on some of their more experimental tracks. And it's fine, but once again, like the other tracks, it doesn't really go anywhere else other than the main track. Napalm's doing all kinds of vocal gymnastics on it, which is pretty cool, but I expected some kind of big climax or some explosiveness or dynamic change, just get loud or change tempo, and it never really does that. And it's fine, it's hypnotic, you can kind of jam out or zone out to it, but it doesn't do anything beyond that. When I was a kid, I used to love the Star Trek movies, as Tim and I talk about, and he gives me shit for a lot on his channel. But you talk about any great movie saga or movie series, whether it's Nightmare on Elm Street, Star Trek, now more recently with Marvel and the the Avengers and anything like that, or you can even go before. You only got to spend X amount of time with these characters you love every couple of years. They're going to release a new product, and that's it. If it's a dud or if it's okay, that's all you have for 2 years, and that's the only time you're going to get to spend with these people. And so a lot of times in those movies, when they put out an okay or a bad movie, it was disappointment, or it was like, oh man, this is it. This is almost over, and this is what happened here. I think for this album is the case because, and there are some unfortunate circumstances, and there's not a criticism. Look, the lead singer unfortunately had to deal with some stuff, as we've talked about. There was a global pandemic, which nobody saw coming, and then they had a record label issue. So there were various issues which delayed this album by about 2 or 3 years. But the problem I have is that it was a good album when it could have been a great album. It was too short. There are too many interludes. 25% of the album is interludes, and it wasn't explosive enough. I felt that Perrin Moss was highly underutilized. He didn't get to do as much. There wasn't enough guitar. Napalm is a great guitar player. She plays guitar a lot like John Frusciante. That's a very hard thing to do. And to have a voice like that, that's a double weapon right there. And she didn't play as much guitar in this album. And I know part of it was that she had to relearn to play guitar after her surgery, and that's fine, totally understandable. But they started recording this album well before she had surgery. So it was interesting. This album was too short. If you take away the 3 interludes, you're looking at 38, 39 minutes. And unfortunately, it's look, you haven't spent any time with this gang, these characters, these musicians, which you love, for 6 years as a collective, other than live performances. And to put out a short album that was not very explosive and only had 4 A songs, 5 B songs, and 3 throwaway interludes was a little bit of a letdown to me. It was good, but not great. It's not an album I would start somebody, or I would introduce anybody to the world of Hiatus Kaiyote. That's still Choose Your Weapon. And so I was expecting a home run. Instead, I was given probably either a single and just got to second base on an error, or a double. So overall, there's some good, really good things about it. It has 4 tremendous songs, which are going to be in this band's set forever. But the album to me almost feels like a middle piece in their career, similar to A Day at the Races by Queen, which was after A Night at the Opera was just such a tremendous album, such a historic album. Everybody loved it. It's still played today. And when A Day at the Opera came out a year or two later, it was a little bit of a letdown. That album's great. The thing is also, you have to remember, when I first listened to that album was about 20 plus years after it came out. I think it was 1975 or 76. So I'm listening to that album as a piece much later. And also, it's a different era back then. Albums would come out a lot sooner. Bands were just more productive putting out albums more often. And that was a middle piece of Queen's career. They went on to put out many more albums later on in Flash Gordon soundtrack too. And they didn't even, that was years away before they got into 80s Queen. So now if you look back at an album like that, or any middle album in a band's career, it's cool and you can enjoy it. But when it's a fresh album that comes out and there's nothing else in the future, it's a little bit of a letdown. What's good to know is that since this album was being worked on 3, 4, even 5 years ago, they're already in a process of recording album number 4. It's being worked on, and hopefully, willing, it comes out a little bit sooner than 6 years. And plus, they're on a new label, so hopefully, we're looking at, let's say, 2023 maybe, or 2024 at latest. So I give this album overall a 6.5 out of 10. It was good, not great. I think there's some good stuff on here, but ultimately it's a little bit of a disappointment just due to the expectations, which were through the roof. And sometimes in life, that's how it goes. Like the old saying, sometimes it's better to be lucky than be good. But I'll kind of freestyle on that a little bit for here. Sometimes it's better to have no expectations and be impressed than have all the expectations in the world and be let down a little bit. So that's Hiatus Kaiyote Mood Valiant. I mean, still check it out. Most of the reviews of this album have been positive so far. I think this is probably the most negative review you'll hear. and I listened to it a bunch of times through, and this is how I feel. So I'm ready to take the criticism and come at me. I will say just trends in general in the music industry. The album, of course, especially the last 5 to 10 years of Spotify, is kind of a dying thing right now. And so it's cool that bands are still releasing albums or artists are still releasing albums. And look, it may not be, there are still going to be groups or individuals who use the album as just a creative outlet for an entire story or a piece. But we are seeing more and more through Spotify. It's, I don't say better, but, and this is more so for, MCs or artists as opposed to full bands who write songs and whatnot of their own songs as opposed to producer. But even pop singers, it's more about sometimes putting out one song, getting it on Spotify, then putting out a full album, or putting out a bunch of singles and then putting them together on an album. That's interesting. It's go forward, see forward how this does in the music industry. And also in terms of success, look, there's a good shot this album does really, really well because it already has a couple of singles which have done well in a streaming platform, whether it's Apple Music or Spotify. So there's a good chance this album does well. And also remember too, I'm in that music audience that is very much about weirdness, and I love experimentation. I do love pop music as well, and kind of doing twisting and turning and bending and manipulating pop music, making it a little bit off and interesting. And I cherish that kind of stuff. Hopefully, Hiatus Kaiyote will be in the United States touring in 2022. I know I'll still see them. I'm not gonna hold a decent album against them, of course. As it Chivalry is Not Dead was awesome live, and I'm kind of curious to hear some of the other tracks that they do choose to do live. Tell me what you think about this. And this is going to be an ongoing thing in between editing future full-length Everybody in the Pool episodes. One album that is coming out the end of the summer in August is Quicksand. They're 3 for 3 with albums so far. I did hear the new track. I wasn't super impressed by it. So it's going to be interesting to see if a band like Quicksand, which is a very strong 3 for 3, can go 4 for 4. I'm Method Mike A. We will be back soon. Bye.